November. After that, there'll be a briefing by Richard Bennett, the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan. Tomorrow, Saturday, we will observe the International Day to End Impunity for crimes against journalists, those who get killed simply for doing their important job of reporting to the public and pursuing the truth. In his message for the day, the Secretary General underscores that a free press is fundamental to human rights, to democracy, and to the rule of law. As you well know, recent years have seen an alarming rate of fatalities in conflict zones, particularly in Gaza, which has seen the highest number of killings of journalists and media workers in the war in decades. According to a new report by the UN Educational and Scientific Organization, 85% of all killings reported by UNESCO since 2006 are considered unresolved. And today, the Secretary General delivered a message to the UN International Media Seminar on Peace in the Middle East, which is going on in Geneva. In his message, he warned that journalists in Gaza have been killed at a level unseen by any conflict in modern times. The ongoing ban preventing international journalists from Gaza suffocates the truth even further, he said. At the same time, he added several journalists have also been killed or injured covering key stories impacting the occupied West Bank. This is unacceptable, he said. The voice of journalists must be protected and press freedom must be safeguarded. Just a short while ago, the UN's Interagency Standing Committee, which brings together leaders of 15 UN humanitarian agencies and also large international NGOs, humanitarian NGOs, issued a joint statement describing the situation unfolding in North Gaza as apocalyptic. The group says that hospitals have been almost entirely cut off from supplies, come under attack, killing patients, destroying vital equipment, disrupting life-saving services. Health workers and patients have been taken into custody. Fighting has also been reportedly taking place inside hospitals. The committee has received reports of civilians being targeted while trying to seek safety and of men and boys being arrested and taken to unknown locations and detention. The IASC also recalled that the Israeli parliament adopted legislation recently that would then ban unwanted revoke its privileges and immunities. If implemented, the committee warns such measures would be a catastrophe for the humanitarian response in Gaza, diametrically opposed to the UN Charter, with potentially dire impacts on the rights of millions of Palestinians who rely on UNRWA for assistance and in violation of Israel's obligations under international law. There is no alternative. UNRWA, the group says, full statement is online. And turning to the situation on the ground in Gaza, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warns that in North Gaza Governorate, virtually all incoming supplies and humanitarian services have ceased. This is due to the ongoing siege imposed by Israeli security forces, as well as insecurity, limited supplies, and the displacement of aid workers. Some 100,000 people recently displaced from North Gaza are sheltering in schools, buildings, and makeshift sites in Gaza City, while about 75,000 people are estimated to remain in North Gaza Governorate. With no electricity or fuel allowed since October 1st, only 2 of 8 water wells in Jabalia refugee camp remain functional, both unfortunately just partially. As of yesterday, no bakeries or public kitchens are operational. Only 2 of 20 health service points and 2 hospitals remain operational, all partially. Rescue operations have come to a halt. South of Wadi Gaza, OCHA is closely monitoring reports of ongoing intense hostilities in the northern Nuseirat area, Deir al-Balah Governorate, with a high number of casualties admitted to Al-Wada Hospital. This area has been largely inaccessible for months, with the latest denial of access for OCHA team occurring earlier this week. However, our teams remain deployed nearby, observing displacement southward, receiving reports of families trapped in the area, unable to leave its ongoing military operations. While OCHA reports that the UN and our partners are working to support displaced Palestinians ahead of the rainy season, yesterday in Deir al-Balah, OCHA participated in an assessment of 2 displacement sites in the Masha'Allah area, where nearly 8,000 people have sought shelter. The team says that it is urgent that the makeshift shelters at these sites can be repaired and improved to protect people from excess water. Meanwhile, we also have an update for you on the polio the vaccination campaign, which is set to resume tomorrow in northern Gaza. Vaccines will be delivered by 216 teams across about 100 fixed sites, nearly 24 of which were added to ensure increased availability of vaccination in areas where recently displaced people are seeking shelter. Our colleagues from UNICEF and the World Food Program say humanitarian pause necessary to conduct this extremely important campaign has been assured. The area of pause has been substantially reduced compared to the first round of vaccination that took place in the north back in September. It is now limited to Gaza City. This means that some 15,000 children under the age of 10 in parts of North Gaza, including Jabalia, Benuia, and Beit Hanun, remain inaccessible and could be missed during the campaign, which compromises its overall effectiveness. As a reminder, in order to interrupt transmission of the polio virus, at least 90% of all children in every community and neighborhood must be vaccinated. And moving north to Lebanon today, General Ras Olara, force commander for UNIFIL, met with Lebanese officials that included the Speaker of the Parliament, Abdul Berry, Prime Minister Najib Mikati, the Foreign Minister Abdullah Abu Habib, and the commander of the Lebanese Armed Forces, General Joseph Aoun. They discussed the ongoing conflict and its serious implications on civilians, especially in areas where peacekeepers operate. General Ras Olara emphasized the urgent need to resolve issues at the negotiating table, a political and a diplomatic solution with the full implementation, recommitment to Resolution 1701 is the only way to return to cessation of hostilities. He also welcomed the assurances given to him by all interlocutors in this regard. Meanwhile, on the ground, one of the peacekeeping patrols was blocked by the IDF near Hula in Central East. The peacekeepers remain in position. We strongly remind all actors of their obligations to ensure that UN peacekeepers have unrestricted freedom of movement in its area of operations. On the ground, IDF airstrikes continue across Lebanon, with the first strikes in Beirut's southern suburbs in several days, while strikes continue in Baalbek. Lebanese authorities are reporting at least 13 fatalities, including children, from the strikes, the Israeli strikes today. The terrible impact on civilians is, of course, a grave concern to us. In addition, we note the serious concern about reports of at least 7 civilians killed from Hezbollah strikes into northern Israel over the last 24 hours. We condemn the rising toll on civilians and civilian infrastructure, the loss of civilian life on both sides of the blue line. We also note the statement from the special coordinator from Lebanon that recent evacuation orders for the cities of Baalbek and Tyre forced tens of thousands of Lebanese to flee en masse, worsening an already catastrophic displacement situation. She also said that Lebanon's ancient cultural sites are also in danger. Special coordinator Jimmy Pasher said, underscored that Lebanon's cultural heritage must not be yet another casualty of this devastating conflict. We remind all parties that they must follow international law and protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. And also, just on Lebanon, despite the ongoing hostilities, our humanitarian partners are continuing their response. 2 humanitarian convoys delivered emergency supplies to Tyre, and that included water, blanket, ready-to-meal meats, and other items. The teams also conducted an emergency needs assessment of the population that has been displaced and that is remaining in the town. So far, since the recent escalation, a total of 15 convoys have been successfully organized to reach areas in Tyre, in Hasbaya, and Marjiyun, as well as Baalbek. Our colleagues from the International Organization for Migration have reported more than 842,000 people displaced in Lebanon since October 2023. For its part, the UN Refugee Agency reports that since September 23rd of this year, 469,000 men, women, and children have fled from Lebanon into Syria. That's based on estimates given to us by the Syrian Arab Red Crescent. The conflict continues to impact civilian infrastructure. For example, since October 8th of last year, at least 29 water facilities have been damaged, impacting water supply to more than 360,000 people, primarily in southern Lebanon. That's what UNICEF is telling us. Moving on to Pakistan, I'll tell you that the Secretary General strongly condemned the attack that took place today in Balochistan province, which reportedly led to the deaths of at least 7 people, including 5 school children, and injured 23 others. The Secretary General stresses that attacks against civilians, healthcare facilities, and healthcare workers are unacceptable. He extends his deepest condolences to the families and calls on the government of Pakistan to conduct an investigation and ensure that those responsible are brought to justice and held accountable. And on Bolivia, I wanted to tell you that the Secretary General is following closely and with concern the escalating tensions in that country. He urges all parties to exercise restraint and refrain from any acts of violence. The Secretary General calls on all political actors to resolve their differences by peaceful means, full respect of human rights. I also have a statement on the situation in Sudan. The Secretary General strongly condemns the recent attack by the Rapid Support Forces in Al Jazeera state. It's escalating violence across the country. The Secretary General is appalled by large numbers of civilians being killed, being detained, or being displaced, as well as acts of sexual violence against women and girls, the looting of homes, and the looting of markets, and the burning of farms. Such acts may constitute serious violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law. Perpetrators of such serious violations must be held to account. The Secretary General notes with alarm that the humanitarian situation in Sudan continues to worsen, with hunger and disease continuing to spread. Half of the population of Sudan in need of aid. He demands that all parties to the conflict facilitate the safe, the rapid, and the unimpeded humanitarian access to all civilians in need in Sudan through all necessary routes in line with their obligations under international humanitarian law. The Secretary General renews his call for a ceasefire to spare the Sudanese civilians from any further suffering. The personal envoy of the Secretary General, Ramtan Lamamra, will continue to engage with the parties and all relevant stakeholders to de-escalate the conflict and to explore the modalities to strengthen the protection of civilians. And I'll continue on Sudan on humanitarian part. The International Organization for Migration now reports more than 135,000 people have been displaced from locations across Al Jazeera state between October 20th and 30th. That's 2 days ago. More than half have fled to Gudarif state, which is with nearly a third seeking shelter in Salah state. Our colleagues from OCHA remain deeply concerned about the plight of civilians trapped in the ongoing fighting in Al Jazeera state, as well as the safety of those who are forced to flee. We and our humanitarian partners, especially local organizations and volunteers, are supporting thousands of these new arrivals with urgent assistance, as well as critical services such as family tracing, family reunification services, mental health, and psychosocial support. As we have repeatedly said, civilians must be protected, whether they move or they stay, whether they be able to receive the humanitarian assistance they need. Turning to South Sudan, the horrific humanitarian situation there, the World Food Program is urgently appealing to donors to provide early funding for next year's operations in the country. The food agency needs $404 million so it can reposition food to prevent operational costs and hunger through 2025. And a note on the change in our posture in Somalia. After more than 10 years, the UN assistance mission in Somalia ceased operations yesterday and was succeeded by the UN Transitional Assistance Mission for Somalia, which means we have a new acronym. UNTMISS. Okay. That is as of today. And of course, the change is pursuant to Security Council Resolution 2753. 2023. Over the past decade, UNSOM have made significant contributions to Somali efforts to advance state-building priorities in Somalia. The establishment of the new mission reflects the progress in the country and is in line with the request of the federal government of Somalia for a 2-year period of transition of UNSOM's functions to national institutions. The UN country team and the stakeholders by October of 2026. Under the new mandate, the UN mission will commence the transition process while they also continue to provide assistance to Somalia as they implement national priorities. The UN remains committed to continuing supporting the government and people of Somalia throughout the transition and beyond. Almost done. 2 new resident coordinators. The Secretary General has appointed Susan Ngongi Namondo of Cameroon as the new UN resident coordinator in Tanzania. She starts today now that the government has cleared her appointment. She brings over 25 years of experience in development work, including 19 years leading development professionals in various areas. She was previously resident coordinator in Uganda and resident humanitarian coordinator in Eritrea. We congratulate her. Also, the Secretary General appointed Leonard Zulu of Zimbabwe as the new resident coordinator in Uganda. He also started today, now that he has the government's approval. He brings more than 20 years of experience in humanitarian action, development, peace building, human rights, protection of refugees and asylum seekers. Previous to that, he worked for UNHCR in Afghanistan and many other countries. We congratulate him. Monday, just pencil in. We're trying to get for you Georgios Petropoulos, the head of OCHA's office in Gaza. We don't succeed for Monday, it'll be later in the week. And then at 1:30 on Monday, Nicholas Levra, the special rapporteur of minority issues, here to answer your question, which I will now do.
Thank you, Stan. I just want to make sure that on Sudan, all of those violations that you listed were from the RSF.
I think we have seen, yes, we have seen in Al Jazeera violations from the RSF, but we have seen many other groups also potentially violate international law.
But not in
Al Jazeera, I believe it.
Okay. And also on Sudan, the last effort to get the RSF and the government together was in Geneva, I believe, and that was some months ago. What efforts is the UN making to actually try and get both sides to sit down at a negotiating table? Because in Geneva, only one side really showed up.
I mean, Mr. Lamamra is continuing his efforts, continuing his contacts, and obviously, when I think there is a critical mass of progress, we may be able to move forward.
Just on what you said about UNIFIL, are there any more details on why this patrol was blocked?
No. Deji.
Yes, on the polling campaign, I was reading 2 press releases, one from Ottawa and one from Kogat. It's different. It's a little bit different, but from Ottawa, they said they are preparing for their people to get into northern Gaza. Well, first, you just mentioned there will be like more than 200 teams to deliver the vaccine. Will those people from outside northern Gaza or part of them will be just there, helping the delivery?
I think it's a good question. I think it's a combination of both.
Okay, so if Ottawa released this press release, does that mean that those people from Ottawa also get cleared to enter northern Gaza by Kogat?
I mean, whatever Anwar said, I'm not,
okay,
no doubt of the
Right.
veracity of what my colleagues are saying, so I'm not here to interpret.
Okay, so from the Kogat press release, they only mentioned WHO and the UNICEF. They didn't mention anything about Ottawa. Does that still, is this an example that means that Ottawa is still irreplaceable, even though the Israeli parliament has already
the situation of UNRWA's critical role, whether in Gaza or whether in the West Bank, and remind you not just on humanitarian, but on providing all sorts of social services, education, health, psychosocial, and the other. That hasn't changed. The fact that they weren't mentioned in a tweet doesn't change the situation.
One last thing. You just mentioned that this polio campaign now in northern Gaza will only be conducted in Gaza City, not some other places. But will UN and its agencies request extra, let's say, extra time for the other locations like Jabalia?
But we have this announcement from our colleagues who run the campaign. I'm sure they have pushed the envelope with all parties involved as much as they can. This is what we've been agreed to, and they will move forward, but obviously not as effective as if we had more areas.
Thank you.
Joseph Klein, Canada Free Press.
Thank you. Do you know that any representative agencies of the World Food Program, World Health Organization, UNICEF, UNESCO, etc., are to entry by Israel?
I'm not aware of any public statements. Whether or not certain individuals from certain agencies have not gotten the permits or the right to, I can't speak to.
That's something you can check on, because the reason I'm asking the law passed by only applies to as far as I know.
That's correct.
Israel
I mean, it will come as no surprise that we don't. But, what is the question?
Let me just,
What is the question? Sorry.
evidence of someone from personality. Tax.
What is it, Joe? Joe, what is the question? I know. I believe the Senate,
Honor facilities.
but just, we all,
Okay.
just pitch.
The question, the question is, would you say that law, if the Knesset legislation only focuses on not other UN organizations, representatives have not been blocked with accessing Gaza.
We're talking about obligations that Israel has under international law regarding privileges and immunities, regarding agreements already signed. And national law cannot override that, not just in Israel, but anywhere. Gabby.
Thank you, Steph. As you know, Special Rapporteur Francisca Albanese is in New York. She was invited to speak later today at the New School. And there's a group that's going to protest her presence there. And in their press release announcing to the media that they were going to protest her, they said that they are going to present her today with, in their words, a beeper. At minimum, this is intimidation. At more, it could be perceived as perhaps a direct threat against a UN Special Rapporteur. Is the Secretary General aware of this, and what is his reaction?
We're aware of it from what you've told me. I'm not going to get into details of what every group says. We believe in the right of freedom of expression and demonstration peacefully, and that we stand against any threats of violence.
Do you think that the Secretary General should ask DSS to at least inform local law enforcement about a possible threat against us?
We don't discuss security issues.
If I can follow up on one more, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Thanks, Steph. On the polio vaccine in northern Gaza, it's limited to Gaza City. However, Beit Hanun is only 11 kilometers north of Gaza City. I guess my question is, people are going to wonder, how is it that the UN can get 216 teams into Gaza City in the north, but everywhere else, nothing, no aid was given to anybody else just less than 12 kilometers away? As the UN, or would the UN consider pressuring Israel to say, if you're allowing polio vaccines in, we also want needed as well.
I think as I kind of tried to explain it to Deji, our colleagues from UNICEF and WHO are all spearheading this, are negotiating with all the parties to get these havens, right, small islands of peace where they can deliver these vital vaccines. Obviously, I'm not going to second guess them from this podium. They have done as much as they can with everyone involved, and this is what they've secured. Is it great? Is it perfect? Absolutely not. One is when you're vaccinating against polio, everyone should cooperate. Everyone should facilitate it. You know, on the other side of the world, polio vaccinators were attacked in Pakistan. I mean, the children were killed. The attacks against people who are trying to deliver the most basic vaccine is just heinous. And the facilitation of vaccination in Gaza should be facilitated by all. But unfortunately, this is a result that we have. Okay. You and then Margaret and then
Thank you, Steve. I have follow-up question about polio campaign. So, why is the reason we campaign? Israel on 40 united and one was do you think you can get more than 90%?
Listen, I think, as I said, my colleagues who are dealing with this, who are negotiating with the Israelis, and I assume negotiating with Hamas and other armed groups, because it is about all of the parties who are fighting and ensuring that there are safe spaces for vaccination. This is the best that they've been able to get. I'm sure it's not through lack of extensive trying, extensive efforts, extensive passion for what they do. But this is where we are, and I think whether they'll get to 90%. I think we'll have to assess that afterwards. Margaret.
Also on polio. So you just finished reading us this interagency statement saying northern Gaza is apocalyptic. It sounds very dangerous for the humanitarians to be there in the first place. So who took the decision to restart the campaign? Was it each individual agency, or did it go up the food chain to the Secretary
No, they
General?
worked. The humanitarian agencies worked on this together. The Secretary General, I think, is extremely proud of the work that they're doing. Gaza is not really a safe space for humanitarian workers, yet they're going ahead with the assurances they've received. We hope all sides will respect the assurances given, and we hope it'll be as successful as possible.
And since it's only in Gaza City, what's the expectation for families that are outside of Gaza City to get there safely?
Very challenging, but I think we'll need to have an update after the week. Pam, and then Michelle, and then December.
Another follow-up on the polio vaccination campaign. You mentioned, and just for clarification, you mentioned a shortened ceasefire or pause to have that happen.
One of us needs to pay attention to what I say. Yes, I
I'll
mentioned
look
it.
at
Yes, okay. What's the
yes.
question?
So, is that confirmed
What do you mean?
that there's going to be?
I mean, these are assurances given, right? I mean, these are assurances given. We
And
have
how
to.
long is the pause?
It'll be as usually these things have been a few
Hours?
hours.
I just
What?
sure.
What is it, Michelle?
Will it be similar to what happened last time? It's pause of like 8 hours
I
for
mean,
2 or 3 days.
It's limited in time. Yes.
I
But again, I think afterwards we'll have better detail.
but you know we won't know before.
I know you.
Anyway, I have a question on North Korea. So obviously they launched their ICBM, and the North Korean foreign minister has said today that North Korea needs to strengthen its nuclear weapons and improve its readiness for retaliatory nuclear strike. The South Koreans have warned that they could be imminently about to conduct a nuclear test. What would be the Secretary General's message to North Korea at this time on the possibility of another nuclear test?
We would not want to see another nuclear test. We want to see step back, moving back towards negotiations, towards a diplomatic solution. These are issues that Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo is currently in Japan on a previously scheduled trip. She will be going to the Republic of Korea next week. I'm sure these are issues that will be part of her discussion.
And what would be the Secretary General's message to the Security Council, which is clearly divided on this issue?
Unity. Get to some.
Thank you, Steve. I'd like to follow up on your answer regarding banning Ottawa and other. Just to clarify, aren't your staff, especially other from other organizations, not getting visas? For example, OCHA, 2 hits didn't get their visas renewed. Human Rights Council, UN.
Completely. I think, sorry, probably over-caffeinated. The way I heard Joe's question was specifically about Gaza, right? But it is clear that there have been visa denials for a whole sorts of people from throughout the UN system.
I have another question on in the Guardian. They reported that the UN Secretary General has warned Israel to carry out an ethnic cleansing of Gaza if the international community doesn't move and prevent it. My question here is, a lot of people, including special rapporteurs in this organization and people also from outside this organization who work on this field, say that ethnic cleansing is actually already happening in Gaza. The fact that you have now more than 43,000 people who are. So isn't it a little bit too late and too not like doesn't reflect what's actually happening?
I think different people in this system, different entities have different mandates and different opinions. The Secretary General has his, and some special rapporteurs and others have theirs. Okay, thank you all. Security Council for you.
Okay, I think we're okay to start. Thank you everybody for coming today. As you know, today is the first day of the UK's presidency of the UN Security Council for the month of November. We're looking forward to briefing you today on the UK's priorities and programme of work for the month. Today with us we have Ambassador Barbara Woodward, UK Permanent Representative to the UN, and Fergus Exley, Minister, Councillor and Political Coordinator for the UK at the UN. We'll start with some opening remarks from the Ambassador and then we'll move to Q&A. So if you have a question, just wave at me. I'll come to you all in order. And I think we have quite a few people dialing in online because it's Friday. So my colleague Rosie will be monitoring. So just please drop a line in the chat and I'll come to you online as well. So without further ado, over to the Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. As you all know, it's been well trailed. The UK assumes the presidency of the UN Security Council from today. As I think you also will know, we try and run efficient and open presidencies, and talking to you today and during the month will be an important part of our work to help you do your very important work on reporting here. And my team is ready to help you throughout the month. I'd like to start by outlining our priorities for the month, and then of course we'll open up to questions. Let me start by stating the obvious, but it's still worth stating, I think. We assume the presidency during an exceptionally difficult time. The world is facing more conflict now than at any other point since World War II. And it's worth remembering, and you know this very well from your work, this is not abstract conflict. For millions of people, conflict means suffering, grief, fear. It means a lack of certainty about if they will eat, where they will sleep, whether they will live to the end of the day, whether their children will live to the end of the day. Over 339 million people currently rely on humanitarian aid delivered by the UN and its humanitarian partners just to survive. And all the while, the UN is under enormous pressure from various quarters. But all over the world too, the UN remains in every war zone, in every refugee camp. The UN is a beacon of hope for so many, but in particular, I would say at this time, a beacon of hope for Palestinians. And UNRWA is their irreplaceable lifeline. So this week's Israeli Knesset bills restricting UNRWA's ability to work are totally wrong. Palestinians need the UN, but we all need the UN. So there's no justification for denying civilians access to basic aid, and there is no one but UNRWA that can deliver aid on the enormous scale that is now required in Gaza and the region, and no amount of rhetoric can change that. So I want to reiterate that the UK is committed to supporting the UN, to supporting Palestinians in Gaza and beyond, and we are committed as leading humanitarian donors. Now, turning more specifically to our presidency, as I said, the world is facing more conflict than at any other time since World War II, and our signature events will aim to address that. We'll focus on the three biggest conflicts in the world today, which span three different continents: the devastation and the risk of war in the Middle East, Russia's ongoing violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty in Europe, and the appalling conflict in Sudan. On the Middle East, on the morning of Monday, the 18th of November, we expect the UK's Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, to chair a Security Council briefing on the Middle East. The Council has, of course, had many emergency meetings on this, and my Foreign Secretary has been clear. We need an immediate ceasefire in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. We need an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah. Further escalation is in no one's interests. No good can come from pouring fuel on the fire of the flames and escalating this cycle of violence. And it is time for all sides in this conflict to draw a line. Ultimately, the only way to secure not just an immediate, but also a lasting ceasefire is a two-state solution. And to achieve this, of course, we need to think about what pathway there is to rebuilding Gaza as part of a viable Palestinian state, including East Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank, living side by side with a secure and safe Israel. And we need to think about what that looks like. I want to underline that the Palestinian and Israeli people alike have a right to self-determination, safety and security. And achieving that through diplomacy, not war, will be a focus for our UK presidency. Second, on Ukraine. In the afternoon of the 18th of November, so that's the same afternoon, my Foreign Secretary will chair a briefing on Ukraine just ahead of the 1000th day of the war that week. It may be 2.5 years now since Russia first invaded Ukraine, but our support for Ukraine as it fights to defend its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, and the principles of the UN Charter remains iron. The international community must never, and we will never, become complacent about such a flagrant violation of the UN Charter. Because Putin will not stop at Ukraine. Just look at the level of chaos and conflict around the world that can be traced back to Russia. Russia has not denied the fact that it's doing deals with North Korea to use North Korean troops as cannon fodder for its disastrous war. 10,000 North Korean troops have already arrived in Russia. Russia is sourcing drones and munition from Iran, funding its sponsorship of terrorism across the Middle East. And as I've said before, we can be sure that Iran and North Korea are exacting a heavy price from Russia for their support. There are few things that Russia has left to offer that we know North Korea and Iran want. And of course, Russia has already blocked the UN from monitoring North Korea's illegal nuclear and ballistic missile program. So where there is death and chaos, President Putin's hand is rarely far behind. So we will once again be using our presidency to call out Russia's disinformation and expose their crimes. We plan to run a constructive and effective presidency. We would expect nothing less, I think, from a permanent member of the Security Council. Unfortunately, we get less, much less, from Russia. They blocked our programme of work this morning from being adopted on the basis of this Ukraine briefing. We will proceed nonetheless, and my team will share our draft programme of work with you. It's been circulated because there will be no formal version published online. We will also publish daily updates on the programme on our Twitter account. Third, on Sudan, we are, as you know, 19 months in to the war. Both sides are committing egregious human rights violations, including the widespread rape of women and girls. More than half the Sudanese population are experiencing severe food insecurity. Despite this, the SAF and the RSF remain focused on fighting each other and not the famine and suffering facing their country. Even since the Adre border opened in August, fewer than 30 trucks of aid are getting in per week, and that is nowhere near enough to meet the needs of 9 million people suffering in Darfur. The border opening is due to expire on the 16th of November, and we need it to remain open. Indeed, all possible routes for aid, whether they are cross-border or across conflict lines, need to be maximised. If they're not, countless lives will be lost. So this is a priority for us, and on the 12th of November, our Minister for the UN and for Africa, Lord Collins, will focus a briefing on scaling up aid delivery and ensuring greater protection of civilians by all sides, as the Secretary-General has called for. We will be shortly introducing a draft Security Council resolution among Council members to drive forward progress on this. The draft resolution will be based on the Secretary-General's recommendations and will focus on developing a compliance mechanism for the warring parties' commitments they made on the protection of civilians in Jeddah over a year ago in 2023, and ways to support mediation efforts to deliver a ceasefire, even if we start with local ceasefires before moving to a national one. And so then finally, a couple of words on the programme of work. Beyond those three signature events on the Middle East, on Ukraine and on Sudan, we'll have a pretty busy month of regular business as well. Just this afternoon, to give you a heads up, the Council will convene for a debate on Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we expect to adopt a reauthorisation of the mandate for EUFOR, which remains, of course, crucial for peace and security in Bosnia and Herzegovina and to support the implementation of the Dayton Peace Agreement. We can talk about other things in the programme as we go through, but as you can see, it's going to be a busy month. We very much look forward to working with you and thank you for your interest in our work and I'm now happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll help you moderate the hands. So yeah, first question to you, Dee.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing, and we hope you will talk to us at the stakeout often. I will try. Can you tell us first whether there is any prospect of any council product coming out in this month on the Middle East, Gaza, Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, possibly. And secondly, on Sudan, is there also any prospect of any council product, since it is a signature event of your presidency? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edie, for both of those questions and for your kind words. So happily, my answer on all of those is yes, but let me elaborate a bit. So on the Middle East, at the moment, we're very focused on the appalling humanitarian situation, not just in Gaza, but also in particular in Lebanon and the displacement of refugees from Lebanon into Syria. So I know that our E10 colleagues have been looking at that very closely and considering a draft Security Council resolution. We haven't seen that yet, but it's definitely on the stocks and something that they would like to advance. At the same time, we want to give further consideration, as I said in my remarks, to the sort of longer term perspective, the importance of a two-state solution. You'll remember we sort of have been around this, of course, several times. We've had Secretary Blinken's sort of 5 no's. We've had a draft from the French much earlier in the year, and we would definitely like to explore if there is scope to look towards something more long-term there as well. So we'll see where we can get to on the back of the resolutions we've already had. I would say that we're very mindful as a council, and certainly as the UK, of our responsibility to drive forward council action in this area, but also to make sure we have products that have meaning on the ground. And I think 2735, with the appointment of Sigrid Kaag, was a good example of that. But of course, the current problems with UNRWA and others are things that we need to address as well. But definitely products in mind there. And the same on Sudan. We're penholders on Sudan, and on the back of the Secretary General's report on protection of civilians in particular, we will be circulating, or beginning the process of circulating today, a draft Security Council resolution on Sudan. Obviously, we want to focus on protection of civilians, the humanitarian situation, as I mentioned, with more than 9 million people facing food insecurity, but also what we can do to find a mechanism to draw the warring parties back towards the Jeddah process, to look at where mediation can work, to look too at whether we can find ways of local ceasefires leading to national ceasefires, and then of course we need to look in particular at keeping the border crossing at Adre open beyond the 15th of November, and actually opening up as much more as we can. So there's quite a lot of material there which we will reflect in our draft council resolution. Thank you.
Ambassador Amelie.
Thank you, Ambassador Amelie Boutelier from AFP News Agency. I have 2 technical questions and 1 more broad question. First, maybe your W was not adopted. Does that mean that there would be a vote at the beginning of every meeting, like it was the case a few months ago? Yes.
Yeah, that we have to do the program of work at the beginning of every day, I think, to every session.
And so we will circulate a daily schedule, and then at the beginning of every council meeting, obviously we have to adopt an agenda. It is up to any council member if they want to call a vote in that process. I don't expect they will routinely. So we will work day by day, and we'll post day by day program on our website.
Okay. What about if I'm not mistaken, a request from several countries about a meeting about the new launch from the theater yesterday. Is it scheduled for next week? Which day?
So yes, it is scheduled for Monday, and for obvious reasons, this was an ICBM launch on an unprecedented scale and with all of the implications for regional and international security that we've seen before. So we've moved very quickly to put that in the schedule.
And my last one, sorry, is less technical. If I'm not mistaken, you've been working for a while on a product on Myanmar, a country you did not mention. How is the work going on that? Do you expect something during your presidency? Thank you.
So we are planning to hold a meeting on Myanmar towards the end of the month. We haven't got an exact date for it yet. And what we want to do is to bring the special envoys from ASEAN and the Secretary General Special Envoy Julie Bishop to give the Council a private briefing. And that, I think, will come helpfully on the back of the ASEAN summit, where, as you'll have seen, the communique helpfully reinforced the importance of ASEAN and the UN working together. So I think we have perhaps an even clearer mandate in the Security Council now to work with ASEAN on Myanmar. And even if we didn't have that mandate, we would all have been following the appalling increase in violence and aggression. And so I think August was the most attacks on record, but we've seen aerial bombardment by the military authorities of civilian infrastructure and the continued use of IEDs, in particular in minority ethnic states. The situation in northern Rakhine is, of course, of great concern. So there's quite a lot there that we want to talk about in this meeting and hear from both the special envoys. I saw Julie Bishop myself just last week. At the same time, while I'm catching up on Myanmar, maybe I can just take the liberty to say a bit more about a potential resolution. You'll remember that we tabled one back in September. That would be the follow-up to 2669, which we passed in 2022. We felt that the situation demanded a further iteration of that discussion. There's I think broad consensus in the Council for moving forward with another resolution on Myanmar, but there are one or two countries that have reservations. I very much hope that now we've got a clear statement from ASEAN that we'll be able to move forward with that, because I think we need to accelerate progress there, but I think it will take a little more time to have those discussions of a product. So I don't know when that will come through, but definitely a meeting later in the month on Myanmar. Thank you.
Okay.
Does the UK support arms embargo, sale or transfer of arms to Israel, or national capacity, or during your advance? And if so, what about Iran? Proxy. Final question. Issue of the two states. UK exclude possibility.
Thank you. So on the question of an arms embargo to Israel, the UK has a very carefully monitored and transparent program of arms exports to Israel. But you'll have seen that in September we cut, I think, 30 items from that program, and Israel responded quite vociferously to that cut in arms exports. Obviously, further action remains under review, but we don't have an arms embargo at the moment, but we have cut our arms exports to Israel bilaterally. On Iran, obviously Iran is covered by a raft of UN and bilateral sanctions, in particular under the JCPOA. The arms transfers from Iran, in particular to Russia, which are being used on the battlefield in Ukraine, are of great concern to us, partly because they are killing Ukrainians, last year we brought an exhibition of drone parts that had come from Iran via Russia and had been found on battlefields of Ukraine to demonstrate the damage that Iran was doing by breaking sanctions and Russia was doing by condoning the breaking of sanctions there. So that's, we're a party, as it were, to arms embargoes under the JCPOA and then 2231 Security Council resolution, which implements all of those. Does that answer your question?
Well, but what are focused on the, quite properly so, arms transit related to Russia. What about the Hezbollah, Hamas,
Yeah.
Houthis? States
Yeah.
Hamas
Yeah, sure.
involved.
Well, no, I mean, it follows that Iran should not be sponsoring all of these armed groups with the export of weapons. So that's also something that we are monitoring very carefully and in various ways. So in the Red Sea, we've been very active with the US, of course, in trying to prevent the Houthis attacking shipping, and also then we've been working closely with Lebanon to support the training of the Lebanese armed forces to try and enforce, to support them to enforce 1701 and push Hezbollah back. And then, of course, with Hamas, we've been very active in Gaza on the response to the 7th of October attacks generally. So we're not condoning in any way Iran breaching multiple UN sanctions in terms of arms exports. In terms of the two-state solution, I think there's still a lot of work to do on how the day after will work. I think broadly what we want to see is a safe and secure Israel living alongside a safe and secure Palestinian state. That will require, I think, a number of steps, probably involving some security guarantees between the US and Saudi, Saudi recognizing Israel. Part of that would be Israel recognizing a Palestinian state, and then support for the viability of a Palestinian state. And we have been actively supporting the new Palestinian government under Mustafa in order to try and help move that forward. But at the moment, as we all know, progress has been very limited, and what we very much hope for is that the ceasefire talks, which are still underway, will bear fruit and we can find some space there.
Ambassador Michelle, next question.
Thanks, Ambassador. On North Korea, the council met this week over North Korean troops in Russia, and then Monday over the recent ICBM test. There's strong warnings about another nuclear test. Do you have any hope that there can be a return to unity on the council on this issue, or has the council effectively become irrelevant due to opposition by a couple of members? And then the US election on Tuesday, how has that weighed over the work of the council?
Thank you. I think the latest development with Russia securing North Korean troops for its war in Ukraine has taken Russia-North Korean cooperation to a new low. We have known for a while that the North Koreans were supplying military hardware to the Russians, but 10,000 troops who were just going into the Ukrainian front lines to be used as cannon fodder by the Russians takes us to a new low. I don't think the council has become irrelevant. We did our best earlier in the week to discuss it, and of course we're coming back to North Korea's ballistic missile launch on Monday. So we've got very much got the situation in our crosshairs. But I think you're right, particularly this new comprehensive agreement signed between Putin and Kim during Putin's visit to North Korea earlier this year has disabled the council quite significantly on this agenda, because we've got a permanent member in effect in breach of multiple Security Council resolutions, breaching sanctions and putting the North Koreans into a war well outside their own continent. So yes, we are definitely hamstrung from taking further action. But the fact that we are able to have a debate at all, I think, is testament to the strength of feeling across the council of the importance of addressing the way in which Russia is instrumentalizing North Korea, but the way in which North Korea has for so long been breaking international law and sanctions. So I think this has been a year of elections around the world, of which the US election has been highly significant, and we're watching it. But I can't really comment on the US election. The UK has had a long-standing special relationship with the US, and we will work with whoever the American people elect to go into the White House, and that long-standing special relationship has not ever been dependent on one party or other on either side.
Dr. Hamid Sayat, orthopedic consultant president. First on Karim Khan and the allegations against him with England support this effort to issue arrest warrant for Israeli war criminals. But my question, second question, Madam Basil, about your speeches in the Security Council. You normally start with October. If any country in the world knows the history of the conflict, it's your country. Tomorrow, October 2nd, is the 107th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, which helped to create this monstrous country called Israel. Now, you know the history. You know what happened in 1949. You know what happened in the Commission, 1939, the White Paper. Now, why you don't just go to that list? And October 7th, in context, as you know that, Gaza siege for 7 years, has been attacked 4 times, occupation 57 years, and yet you start October 7th and the first attack. Why?
So thank you for both of those questions. On the ICC, we support the independence of the ICC, and so those decisions, and we also uphold those decisions. So that would be entirely for the prosecutor of the ICC to follow up, and then we would follow up accordingly. On the Middle East, I recognise that there is a very long history. My interventions in the council are usually 3 or 3.5 minutes, and I think we have to focus on the particular issue of the day, of course taking into account the history of any situation. But that's why we start with the 7th of October. After the 7th of October, we had, I think, over 100 Security Council meetings in the 6 months following, and we normally have sort of quarterly debates on the Middle East. So I think it's important that we focus on the situation at hand and try to, as we have been consistently, secure a ceasefire, get humanitarian aid in, secure the release of the hostages, and move towards a long-term political sustainable settlement. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador. Maggie, next question. Thank you, Ambassador, back here. It's Margaret, VOA. At the last Sudan meeting, the ambassador, to my ears, signaled that he would not be his government. I don't know if you got the same impression, but if you did, have you spoken to him about it? And what would the implications be, I guess, if they don't renew it? And I understand that the Sanctions Committee on Sudan was supposed to lift, the Russians were going to lift their objections to the 2 RSF commanders being sanctioned. It was supposed to be imminent this week. I don't know if it's happened. I didn't see anything on the website, but if you have any information.
So on Ardre, we are doing all we can between now and the 16th of November when it expires in order to ensure that Ardre can remain open. As I said earlier, the volume of trucks going through at 30 a day is woefully below what the 9 million people in Sudan desperately need in terms of aid. We'd like to see more crossing points open. If Ardre is closed again, the humanitarian situation in Sudan will get even worse, and that will of course include the displacement pressure across the border. So we know from Sudan and from so many other conflicts what happens when aid crossing points are closed. So we'll work to try and ensure that it doesn't. I'm afraid I don't have any more on the Sanctions Committee. But
there's a bit more process going on. The committee's reviewing some technical changes. That process is underway.
Thank you, Ambassador, and we're looking forward to the month. It should be busy. Well, at least it will be busy. So two quick follow-ups and then a question. Will your foreign secretary on the 18th with both the morning meeting of the Middle East and the afternoon? Right. Second, just quick follow-up, and I think nobody else can answer this. It's highly unusual for a member to say no to a program of work. So if it comes to a vote on the Ukraine meeting, just to be clear, it's a procedural vote and therefore no vetoes and therefore you need 9 votes. Okay, so now here's the question, which is on 1701. It's been in the breach on both sides for many years. How do you, if that's the goal after some kind of a settlement on Lebanon, how do you enforce it to its core requirements? Thank you.
So can I just pick up on both of those points? So yes, absolutely yes, my foreign secretary will be at both meetings, and that's an indication of the importance he attaches to both subjects. I would say, by way of context, it is a crazy month for international meetings between, there's a Foreign Affairs Committee, a European one, that day, which will draw some people away. There's also, of course, COP and the G20. So this was really the only day we could make it. We really wanted to do it. So that's why we packed 2 important meetings into one day. And you're absolutely right on the procedural point. I mean, we were there this time last year. So, but on 1701, I think the enforcement is, of course, UNIFIL. Sorry, UNIFIL plays a really important role, and we continue to support them and really salute their courage right now, because they are coming under direct attack in ways that they shouldn't at all. But also, we have a long-standing program of supporting the Lebanese armed forces, who would then provide the buffer support for that. I think this has been going on for a while. We trained about 34,000, I think, Lebanese armed forces. There's a way to go. I think it would be unfair to place a burden of being able to implement 1701 on them directly. And there's also, I think, scope for Lebanon to sort out the presidency and some of the internal governance which would support implementing 1701. But I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Fergus.
I mean, obviously, there's talks on the way in the region, as you know. Our foreign secretary has been very clear that he feels there needs to be a ceasefire now in Lebanon. We will obviously support any diplomatic process. The key part of that, of course, will be the full implementation of 1701, as you say, and the elements the ambassador mentioned are the ways we can contribute to that.
Thanks, then, Marianne.
Thanks, Anna. Ambassador Woodward, considering the Islamic Republic of Iran Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei recent directive for his commander to prepare for retaliation against Israel following the Israeli airstrike on the military sites, what measures is the United Kingdom is taking to to prevent further conflict in the region? Also, one question on Afghanistan. As you know, today, Richard Bennett, Special Rapporteur on Afghanistan, published his new report on human rights in Afghanistan. The situation on women's rights is deteriorating further, and is the Security Council going to have any thing planned regarding situation in Afghanistan? And also, he asked the international community to work together and pay more attention on Afghanistan, because right now all the attention is on Gaza and then Lebanon and then Ukraine. What is going to happen on issues of Afghanistan, especially women? If you can add to that, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for both of those questions. And you're right, this question of the aggression between Israel and Iran and this retaliatory measures. So on earlier this week, my foreign secretary spoke both to Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi, but also Prime Minister Netanyahu, in order to encourage both Iran and Israel to de-escalate, to get out of this retaliatory cycle, and to move towards something that was a more long-term, sustainable ceasefire. So we are working very hard, and I know the international partners doing the same thing, but my foreign secretary is very directly involved, speaking to both Iran and Israel on that. On Afghanistan, thank you for raising it, because as you say, we've mentioned the Middle East, we've mentioned Ukraine, we've mentioned Sudan, but the suffering in Afghanistan, particularly for women and girls, is terrible. And we've seen, obviously, not only the recent virtue and vice law, but then just recently the additional one that bans women from speaking out in public and reading the Quran. So what women are suffering, in addition to being deprived of careers and education, really weighs on, I think, all of our consciences. I was very glad to participate last month in a meeting that we jointly organised with the Canadians. As some of you will know, I'm a co-chair of the Group of Friends of Women of Afghanistan here in New York, and with the Canadians, who are the chair of the Group of Friends of Afghanistan in New York. We had a very inspiring briefing from Malala, as well as two Afghan activists, talking about what we could do. Frankly, the room for manoeuvre is very limited, because we need to continue to support the people of Afghanistan, and we are trying to use women where possible to deliver humanitarian aid where the UN can get it in, but we're not willing to compromise with the Taliban on the restrictions they're placing on women and girls. So it's a very difficult situation to manage. But anyway, Malala was, I thought, inspiring and steely at the same time, and reminded us of her experience with Taliban, and of course being shot and nearly killed by the Pakistan Taliban. She said they won't change. So I do think we need to continue to work to find a way to get Afghan women back into the picture, but it is very difficult indeed. We see the Secretary General's Special Rapporteur, Rosa Otunbayeva, regularly, but there's really not much progress to report, I'm afraid.
What do you say about the gender apartheid campaign? Does the UK support that?
The gender apartheid campaign. Yeah, we talked about that a bit when Malala was here. And what worries me about the gender apartheid campaign, if I can be very frank, is that I think we risk getting involved in a debate about apartheid and gender apartheid, while real women and real girls in Afghanistan are not getting enough to eat, they're not getting education, and they're not getting a chance to work. So I think it's a very valid debate to have, but it worries me that the international community will go down this sort of ideological debate rather than focusing on what we can do for women and girls in Afghanistan right now.
Thank you, Ambassador Shireen. Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. I'm Shireen from the Apollo Agency. For the last 2 weeks, our special rapporteurs have been briefing us and have been briefing more delegations as well, and they've been warning against the destruction that is taking place in Gaza, and many of them have actually called it a genocide. And we also have the provisional measures of the International Court of Justice regarding the developments in Gaza. And I know you have mentioned that the 2nd of September, UK suspended 30 licenses to Israel, but Israel was not the only one criticizing this decision. Others have actually argued that this was a rather limited response. So in your national capacity, considering that there's growing consensus that what is occurring in Gaza is a genocide, do you think this suspension is sufficient, or do you think your government will move on and take additional measures in that context? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you again for raising the situation in Gaza. But I should emphasise, as we all know, more than 43,000 people have been killed already. The number of people displaced, and by displaced we don't mean just displaced once, battered up to the north, brought down to the south, sent somewhere else, sheltering in a tent that was then bombed by the IDF, sheltering in a school that had become a shelter that was then bombed. So the humanitarian situation in Gaza is truly appalling and is the focus of our daily efforts, and we are increasing our funding of aid. We have deplored the Knesset bills on UNRWA, which is the backbone, as I said earlier, of delivering aid into Gaza. So there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that we need to focus on the humanitarian situation. The provisions we took to suspend arms exports to Israel were part of a larger picture in that. So we have increased our humanitarian aid. My foreign minister has been speaking to the very highest levels of the Israeli authorities about the importance of getting aid into Gaza. And as my Prime Minister said just last week, there are no more excuses for not getting aid into Gaza. So we're taking, I would say, a very robust line on the importance of doing that and then moving to a ceasefire and getting hostages out and finding a political space. Does that answer your question?
Actually, I specifically asked if you would be thinking about extending, the license and the export of weapons to Israel.
So I think my foreign minister said when we put the export bans in place on the 30 that we have, I think there's about 350 altogether, that any further measures would be up for consideration. So we don't have anything under active consideration, but we certainly haven't ruled it out.
Thank you, Asa.
Thank you. My name is Sam. I'm out of the newspaper. I have two questions. One issue of our own battle, but to Sudan. We know that the UN Security Council resolution on Darfur, etc. But would the UK also support full our embargo to in all of Sudan for parties to the conflict? And if yes, then would you work on a resolution or not? And then the other issue is on the occupied Palestinian territory and the West Bank. You constantly talk at the Security Council about your opposition to settlements and the building of settlements. But the question is, which steps are you actually taking to stop that? Because just talking at the Security Council, we know that it's not really helping, unfortunately. So can you point out two specific steps that the government is taking to do that? And then the second question on Gaza. We know that there are many dual citizens fighting the Israeli army in Gaza too, and some of them may be involved in war crimes. When it comes to UK citizens, is the UK going to take any steps against citizens who are involved also in the Israeli army or maybe committing war crimes there? Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. So starting with Sudan, it's quite clear that a major part of the problem is that both parties are being supplied with weapons from external sources. And in the last Security Council resolution we passed, we were clear that weapons supply and the involvement of external parties needed to stop, and we will continue to press that point very hard indeed. On the West Bank, thank you for picking that up, because I think it's an area where the horror of what is going on in Gaza sometimes eclipses our attention on both the humanitarian but also the political importance of the West Bank. So yes, I do call out illegal settlement expansion and some of the violence that has gone with that. It's been at unprecedented levels recently. I know it's just calling it out of the Security Council. I don't think it's entirely obligatory, so I'm just going to question that. But more importantly, yes, we have followed that up with measures. We have sanctioned individuals who are known to be involved in the expansion settlements in the West Bank. And I can get you some more details on that if that would be helpful, but we place sanctions on them. In terms of dual citizens fighting and committing war crimes, I think we would always be very robust in prosecuting war crimes, whoever they were committed by. So I don't have a specific answer. We haven't got to that point yet, but I think we have a strong record of prosecuting for war crimes.
Thank you very much. That's the names of the Norwegian National News Agency of Ukraine. I also have a question for you as a representative of the United Kingdom. Do you think about at least 2 points of President Zelensky's victory plan, Ukraine's accession to NATO, and the authorization of the use of long-range Western weapons against military targets in Russia?
Thank you. And let me say right from the outset that our support for Ukraine is ironclad for as long as it takes. And that's not just language, that translates into nearly $4 billion per year on support for Ukraine. So I think President Zelensky's victory plan is a very important development. It's important because I think it demonstrates that Ukraine is not only able to fight for its survival, but also to see a way through for peace. So on both the question of NATO membership and long-range weapons, we have been supportive. Obviously, NATO is a membership organisation, and we need to work out what Ukraine's pathway is towards membership of NATO, and that was, I know, was discussed at the last NATO summit, and we need to continue to give Ukraine an important way forward on that, as well as, of course, towards membership of the EU, and those two are slightly linked. In terms of long-range weapons, the UK, as I say, has been very proud to be the largest contributor in Europe of weapons for Ukraine. I think how Ukraine uses them is broadly up to Ukraine, but I think it's important that we don't do two things. That we don't actually have detailed technical discussions about what the way in which the UK is able to support Ukraine, because I think that just plays into Putin's hands. If he knows the sort of weapons we're being supplied and whether or not and how they're going to be used, I think that's actually putting Ukraine's security at risk. But I know that discussions go on all the time between our experts about what we can supply and how to best support Ukraine in its fight for its territorial integrity and sovereignty.
That's good. Conscious of time, so we'll take one more from the room, and then I think we have one remotely.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Stefano Vaccara, La Voce di New York People Press. I have a follow-up and two questions. One follow-up is on Lebanon 1701. Do you think the rules of engagement are fine the way they are, or they should be changed? Then I have a question. We had here Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese, and she proposed a suspension of Israel, and she also had a report just out. So we'd like to know your national capacity. What do you think? And then, as the president of the Security Council, do you think that all resolutions are binding or not? That's a very, we find out a few months ago that they are not. Yes. And that just allowed me to be was actually very important to me. Are you watching the Netflix series as a diplomat? And you think I should learn something? We, as a journalist, if there is anything that we can learn from that series.
On Lebanon 1701 on the rules of engagement, I mean that was of course the Security Council resolution that was agreed after the last conflict. So it may well be that we would need some sort of update, but at the moment we are very much looking at 1701 as the broad basis for what could happen after a ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel. So I think at the moment that looks as if it's broadly right, both geographically and in terms of the excellent work that UNIFIL is doing. But of course, we'll need to update it in the light of a ceasefire. In terms of Francesca Albanese's report, let me be clear, we're not bilaterally, we're not considering suspending Israel. And to be honest, to carry on the bilateral point, I don't think it would be a constructive thing to do. I think we all know that at the end, wars are solved by diplomacy, and being able to talk, including here in New York at the UN, is really important. And then on the question of binding resolutions, I remember the discussions that we had. Yes, we consider Security Council resolutions are binding. There's obviously differences between Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 resolutions, but we do not pass resolutions in order for them to be honoured in the breach more than the observance, although we recognise that that is often, sadly, the case. And I'm afraid, would that I had time to watch Diplomat. I will try and make time and come back to you on that, but I'm afraid I don't have any tips based on that. I'm very sorry.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think we have time for one more question from Ifrica online.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Ambassador. This is Fakhar Ali from Associated Press of Pakistan. My question on Afghanistan has been asked, but I wanted to draw your attention to today's terrorist attack in Pakistan's Balochistan province, in which five school girls were killed. These attacks, as you know, are being carried out by terrorist groups which are based in Afghanistan, and they carry these cross-border attacks. This Afghanistan Taliban government is allowing these terrorist groups to operate from their soil, despite their promises to the international community. Would you have any comment on that?
Well, thank you for your question, and let me say before I answer it that we're very much looking forward to working with Pakistan on the Security Council from the 1st of January. So that will be an important opportunity. And I know that one of the aims of Pakistan joining the Security Council will be counter-terrorism brief. So on the specific attack, let me say first of all, my condolences and sympathies to those who have been bereaved and in this attack, because there is nothing that can ever bring back a lost life caused by a terrorist attack. So my condolences to those involved. I do think that there's obviously been a lot of discussion between Pakistan and Afghanistan about this border terrorism, including, of course, the decision earlier this year to send back a number of Afghan refugees to Afghanistan from Pakistan. But I do think terrorism remains a scourge of our society, sadly, it's a transnational problem, and we very much look forward to continuing our bilateral cooperation with Pakistan on working together to help counter terrorism. And of course, we'll look at it here in the UN context as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We are out of time, but I'll just take one final question.
My name is Sophia Zaghi, Madam President, from Lorient de Beirut. I was wondering if 1559 resolution is still on the table. Sometimes we hear now and then, even the leaders, they are not ready to apply it and implement it. Can you please give us some thought from what you expect from it?
Well, I would say, resolutions are always on the table. We were talking earlier about whether they were binding or not. Obviously, the situation in Lebanon at the moment is not conducive to implementing 1559. But in all of our discussions, and I know in my foreign minister's discussions with Prime Minister McCarthy, there has been a discussion of how to support Lebanon in the future. So we very much hope that we can come back to implementing that sooner rather than later, if we can secure a ceasefire and then put 1701 or something like it, a successor in place, and then come back to 1559.
Thank you everyone for your time. That's it.
The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Mia Amor Motley, Minister for National Security and the Public Service, Minister for Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment of Barbados. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency and invite her to address the Assembly. President, we need a reset, and we need to reset. Mr. President, in your absence, I congratulate you on your assumption of this chairmanship of the General Assembly. We can wait. As I said, Mr. President, we need a reset, and we need to reset. Those of us here today representing our brothers and our sisters the world over have endured 4 years of polycrises. As the children of Mother Earth, we continue to wrestle with the climate crisis. As a human family, we grapple with the legacy of the pandemic. As a digitally connected people, we are now, regrettably, confronted by multiple theaters of war and scenes of horror and famine flowing from that war. Armed conflict instead of pursued development. Citizens of every country as well, struggling to contain the rising cost of living and the implications for them and their families on a day-to-day basis. And Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, we are all now threatened by the second but silent pandemic of antimicrobial resistance, together with a growing incidence of death and disability from chronic non-communicable diseases. We cannot afford the distraction of war. If ever there was a time to pause and to reset, it is now. Collectively as an international community, and individually as leaders in each of our countries, we must now deliver new opportunities and solutions to these crises which dampen economic growth, which restrict the ambitions of our people and numb our sense of the beauty and goodness that the world ought to be offering, because it has it to offer. The reset, for which I'm calling, and indeed all of our citizens are demanding, must see an end to all forms of discrimination. The rules and institutions today exist which create first and second class citizens, as we have said from this podium year after year, depending on your nation of origin, militate against the trust and the credibility and the hope, and it fosters a crisis of confidence in the existing international order, which must become inclusive and responsive for all. More than any other complaint from this podium has been the disparity in treatment and the inability to be able to have fair and transparent treatment for all that would lead to the trust necessary for us to solve the problems of our times that are truly beyond man-made causes. Neo-colonialist structures that perpetuate and reflect an old world order characterized by racism and classism and misogyny, while ignoring the legitimate aspirations of billions, will not help to foster the hope or trust that is necessary to meet these polycrises. We must ensure that the global institutions in developing countries, especially small vulnerable states like my own, or vulnerable middle-income countries, seats at the table of decision making where we can be seen, heard, become active agents in our own cause and lead our own development paradigms. My friends, we are reminded that 2024 is the final year of the United Nations Decade for the People of African Descent. Much has been achieved, but the recognition, the justice, and the development for people of African descent that was promised by this decade has, to say the least, not yet been fully realized. And it is for this reason that the Caribbean community joins the growing chorus, and my own country in particular, for the immediate proclamation of a second decade, to complete the unfinished work and address the matter of reparations for slavery and colonialism. I start here because this is a necessary but complex conversation, and the Caribbean community is resolute that it must happen. Its resolution lies, and I want to be very clear, its resolution lies in a multi-generational approach. In the same way that the £20 million sterling debt that was incurred by the British government only was repaid in this 21st century, almost 200 years later, so that the notion of unaffordability becomes a non-issue once we recognize that the solution to reparations must be multi-generational, and grounded in development. Mr. President, of necessity, the reset must also be characterized by institutional reform, which has to start in the United Nations councils. These councils suggest that some are full members, and others are only part members, and some may be part-time members, and some may be occasional members. All of this has no place in the 21st century. And the anger and the mistrust of our citizens in institutions, in leaders, in multilateralism, and in the processes which exclude while yielding much talk and little action is very real. And nowhere is reform and consequential trust and hope more important to the well-being of billions of people today than in relation to the global financial architecture. Restricted access to capital, its disproportionately high costs, barring us from doing that which we must, its inadequate scale, and the overwhelming burden of debt often imposed on us by circumstances beyond our control. These are all now combining to force governments in the world's poorest countries, and frankly, across many vulnerable middle-income countries, to devote more resources to debt service than to health and education, and in some instances, even infrastructure. For far too many members of the human family, cold ground is our bed, and rock is our pillow. Too many go to bed with their bellies hungry. Too many may not even have a bed. Our reset is therefore collectively build a common agenda that reflects and reinforces our shared humanity. It is that shared humanity that binds us together. Mr. President, you know better than most. Our African brothers and sisters got it right with the principle of Ubuntu, and have used this principle, this General Assembly, to remind us that its simplicity is what we should aspire to. I am because you are. I am because we are. My well-being is tied to yours, and our collective well-being is connected to Mother Earth's. This best voices the approach needed to give expression to the reset that is absolutely necessary. And we acknowledge that there are glimpses of hope. We have, for example, on Monday, agreed to a pact for the future, but we still have more. We have agreed on a global digital compact, but we still have raging pandemics and the slow motion silent pandemic. All of this rests, my friends, on the common agenda that the Secretary General had set out for us before. Yesterday, we agreed in a high-level meeting on a political declaration on antimicrobial resistance. A lot of fancy words, but this is where the rubber hits the road, because all of us in this room know people who have died from infections and for whom the antibiotics simply are no longer effective, so that within 48 hours, a person's life is snuffed out, almost as if they were at war. My friends, following on the implementation of the Bridgetown Initiative and the Paris Pact for People and Planet, the efforts of many across the board, we acknowledge that there is some hope. And it is evident in the beginnings of the reform that we are seeing little by little, but nevertheless, they have started. These are all important steps, but we cannot take our eyes off the prize. Barbados' call for fundamental reset includes attitudes and behavior as much as actions or reforms. Heads of government are in agreement that we must trigger national development agendas of transformation with both speed and scale. We have a date with destiny against 1.5 degrees. We know that that is what is needed to survive, and the implications for people, even as we speak, can be bad. But if there is a failure to act with clarity and purpose, and if the political will retards progress on the front of the much needed reform within the international financial institutions, purely because heads of government do not speak to ministers of finance when they reach Washington, D.C., or their board directors. If there's a need for that to be dealt with, then, my friends, there must be a commitment to be equal to the current challenges in member states if we are not to perpetuate the discriminatory practices that result in undermining the transformational opportunities that we need. Depriving vulnerable countries from being able to access concessional income that is long enough to build the resilience to save lives and to protect livelihoods is unjust. And that is why we must remain focused. That is why, my friends, we launched yesterday the third iteration of the Bridgetown Initiative, which identifies three key principles, very simply. One, we must change the rules of the international financial system and reform its governance and instruments. Two, we must shock-proof vulnerable economies by dealing with debt and liquidity in a comprehensive, development-focused manner. And if we need to give countries a shot of liquidity like we give them a shot of adrenaline to avoid them falling off the cliff of debt, then we must do so. And thirdly, we must augment financing by boosting country capacity to invest in resilience by several means, including what has been announced already, the rechanneling of special drawing rights to our multilateral development partners. But that will only be truly effective if there is another issuance of SDRs in the near future. Indeed, we must also address the challenge, and this, I believe, to be the fundamental mission of this generation, of how we are going to secure the global public commons to be able to maintain our safety and stability as a global community. We're going to have to discuss how we can secure it and, of course, how we must finance it. And that is not only the climate crisis or the loss of biodiversity that we speak about, but the other many global challenges that can truly stabilize countries and regions. Mr. President, these considerations are of fundamental importance to the sustainable existence of our generations, future generations. The SIDS agenda is another story of promises made but not kept. 30 years ago, the international community gathered in my own country to take action for the first time on the unique challenges faced by small island developing states. We birthed in my home country the first ever global agenda for small island developing states, which became known as the Barbados Program of Action. I thank Mauritius for its strategy of implementation, Samoa for its pathway. They were carriers of the baton of a development agenda for small island developing states in the intervening years, in the face of multiple global crises from health to climate to finance. The vulnerabilities, yes, of our countries as small states have become more pronounced. In May of this year, we gathered in Antigua and Barbuda for the 4th International Conference on Small Island Developing States. And I call on the international community and the multilateral system to let us work together to ensure that the promise created in Bridgetown in 1994 is delivered and realized through the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS 2024, otherwise known as ABAS. Let me use this opportunity as well to inform you that 2 days ago we took over the presidency of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, the V20 countries of the world from Ghana, whose president I would like to thank for the excellent stewardship of the group over the past 2 years, and indeed for the strengthening of its institutional capacity. The priorities of our term as chair of the V20 countries will be the multiple dimensions of climate crisis, dealing with them, the impact of the climate crisis on human health, and of course, the issue of debt and climate, because if we don't solve that, we cannot take the appropriate actions to deal with climate. I invite all United Nations members who are not yet members of the V20, but who are climate vulnerable, to join this group, because it is only through amplification of our voices and consistency of our message, solidarity, that we will continue to see the pace and scale of reforms that we need to be able to save our people's lives.
I commend to you the declaration of the leaders of the Climate Malmo Forum that was adopted this week on Wednesday. President, above all else, we need a global reset on peace. There needs to be global peace. Those of us who are old enough would have recognized that there are peaks and valleys as it relates to this issue of conflict. There are few areas where the world is more in need of the United Nations acting as the United Nations to secure the objectives of the Charter and in the area of peace and security. The silence that has engulfed Sudan is unacceptable and may well be rooted in the racism that the world still carries as a badge of honor from the victories of the last great war of the World War II. The actions in Myanmar cannot continue. Ukraine has sucked more oxygen out of the global community and the global financial system than any of us can appropriately accept at the very time when the world needs to be applying its resources and efforts to fight the greatest crisis known to mankind. And the spread of the war from Gaza, the consequences in the West Bank, to now clearly what is happening in Lebanon as we speak with Israel. All of these are but the tip of an iceberg of death, violence, and instability, and robs the global community of oxygen and resources at the very time when we need it most in a strategic way. We all know, as students of history, that even the longest war in history came to an end. These wars, yes, they will come to an end. But the question is when and at what cost, and without much loss of life. So many children not being able to be either given the chance to live or will now live with memories of war that will affect their every action for the next 60, 70, 80 years of their lives. Innocent people are paying the price for the one thing that is theirs to give, and they don't give it willingly, their life. Unless we address the root causes of these wars, one by one, and the manners in which they are being sustained and financed, we will never know anything else other than war and rumors of war in these theaters. The transmittal of these scenes of horror in real time into people's bedrooms, into people's living rooms, will trigger two extreme reactions, neither of which are acceptable to us in the third decade of the 21st century. We will either get the desensitizing of ordinary people to the loss of lives, especially those of innocent children and women on the one hand, or we will get on the other hand the anger and inclination for vengeance that it spawns necessarily. We need peace, and it cannot be too difficult for us to work for peace. It is the same Bible that tells us in the stories of the Old Testament, much which has guided many people across this world. But when we turn from the Old Testament to the New Testament, it is Romans that says to us, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, not any country, not any human being, so that the Bible can't be used as a convenient aid when it suits us and rejected when it doesn't. In the midst of this maelstrom, we were very clear. My country took the step this year of recognizing and establishing diplomatic relations with the state of Palestine, in spite of having supported a two-state solution since 1969. And we did this because it is clear to us that the state and people of Palestine, human beings, are entitled to full recognition by integration into and support from the international community. The Charter does not say we the people, with the exception of any one group from any one part of the world. We join with others, therefore, in congratulating the state of Palestine in taking their seat among the United Nations member states as they did on the 10th of September of this year. And let me be clear, we condemn the actions of Hamas on October 7th, but we equally and strongly deplore the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, which is the result of the disproportionate use of force by Israel. There's no justification for it. And that is why treaties exist governing the rules of engagement for war. Because we as human beings learned better and know better and committed to better. A two-state solution, no matter how elusive it may appear to be now, is the only answer. And I've said already this week that we have known difficult battles in mankind's history. But when we were in it, we didn't think we could achieve it, but we did. We abolished slavery. We removed apartheid in South Africa. These battles are not beyond our creativity, our capacity, and our resilience to resolve them. Similarly, we insist that the killing in Ukraine really has to stop. The people of Ukraine must be allowed to live within the internationally recognized boundaries of their state in peace and freedom from the threat of use or force. And as I said, it is sucking too much oxygen out of the global financial system, and countries that should be the beneficiary of aid are being told that they may have to wait in the interest of the defense of others because of war. I say to us truly, there has to be a singular commitment to build peace. Mr. President, my own region has not escaped the spirit of instability and violence. The Americas do not constitute today a theater of war, but we are today witnessing, for some years now, an unprecedented escalation in the number and caliber of assault weapons, which are finding themselves in the hands of criminals who are wreaking havoc on the legal systems and our societies, particularly in the small island developing states of the Caribbean and indeed in the wider states of Central and Latin America. This scourge caused by guns manufactured in the United States of America primarily also requires a fundamental reset. The right of persons to bear arms in countries not engaged in military conflict should not be an opening to accept as legitimate the presence of assault weapons in countries. It is simply not right. There is no place for assault weapons in our societies. I turn now to the fate of the people of Haiti, which continues to be of major concern to our people in the Caribbean region. The global community now has an opportunity for an essential reset with how it addresses its relationship with Haiti, and which has been born in all kinds of semi and partial concern over the course of the last few decades. We continue to have it as a recurrent decimal because we have failed to solve the problems and put them on a sustainable path to development for its people. What is needed is transformation of our systemation. And yes, we must provide first and foremost security, but transformation must be its handmaiden. Government and people of Haiti need the full support of the international community, short term, but in the long term. And yes, this starts by extending the mandate of the Multinational Security Support Force, escalating the work of the United Nations, deploying all tools of bilateral, regional, and global cooperation, not excluding countries who want to participate for spurious reasons, ensuring that those of us who can step up to the plate by significantly increasing the pledge funds that we do so, because we know that it takes cash to be able to deploy the forces and the police necessary to help with the restoration, so that Asian mother or that Asian child can go about their day-to-day life without fear of being assaulted or killed or being denied the right to work because of their simple fear of walking the streets. The Caribbean community has been working hard this year to support our largest member state. And in the early part of the first few months of this year, we met on Haiti almost 3 to 4 times a week to guarantee the stability that we ask you now to help us secure. We thank the efforts of the Eminent Persons Group of former CARICOM Prime Ministers who were on the front line of helping to resolve this complex problem day in and day out, so that we could find a political consensus for Haiti. That Haiti had at this General Assembly both the interim president of the Transitional Council and Prime Minister O'Neill is a remarkable achievement given where Haiti was in February of this year. Let them continue on a path, please, of securing their future. And we cannot be on this podium speaking about Haiti without thanking Kenya and President Ruto for their remarkable leadership. After many delays and in what represents now a historical precedent for an African country, they have ensured that an African country has taken the lead in helping to tackle the peace and security challenge beyond its own continent. That is the kind of reset that we need in the international community. And this is President, who cannot come on this platform regrettably, although I look forward to the day when I will not have to say it, when we must ask for reprieve for the people of Cuba. It's unacceptable, it's unconscionable, and that it continues today is a mark on our international conscience. The Cuban people continue to face the most dire of economic circumstances, and that this is directly as a result of its exclusion and its designation as a state sponsor of terrorism. And I've addressed our only knowledge of terrorism, and Cuba is in fact the downwind of the Cubana plain off the waters of Barbados, where Cubans, Guyanese, and Koreans were killed. My friends, Cuba has been a valuable partner stepping up for us when it has mattered most, by the provision of nurses and doctors in pandemics, and by the provision of other essential workers when the global community needed it, and when people needed to be liberated in Southern Africa. Reality is that we must have and continue to have resolve calling for the embargo to be lifted, and we will condemn it year after year after year because it is simply wrong. As we say so, we pray that the people of Cuba, as they determine what damages they have come from Hurricane Helen, as well as we pray for the people of Florida, who clearly are going to spend the next few days identifying the damage as a result of a hurricane that hit Category 4 when it reached Florida. This is the climate crisis that we speak about. The people of Nigeria are still counting the bodies with respect to the floods that took place there. We have hard work to do. In our own Caribbean region, Beryl literally decimated the islands of Carriacou and Union Island, and indeed would have affected Grenada and St. Vincent more broadly, Jamaica, and my own country's coastal infrastructure was significantly affected, with our fishing industry, 90% of it being decimated. This season of superlatives, with its floods and droughts, its hurricanes and fires, will take the lives and livelihoods of too many. The climate crisis is hitting us almost weekly across the globe. The deniers of the climate crisis, they too need a reset that will admit of the absolute necessity of collective action by the global community to save our way of life and our planet. Mr. President, at the start of the speech, the skies were much darker. I truly believe so. We are starting to see some glimmers of light. We New York this week, noting that the clouds are lifted, conscious that the sun is peeking out in certain areas, not all, but in certain critical areas, giving us a sense of renewed hope. That reset is in fact not only possible, but necessary in key areas: institutional reform, reform in our financial architecture, reform in how we view development, but above all else, reform in how we see each other and value each other. This hope springs from the path to the future and the many declarations that we have made here, the terms in which my fellow leaders spoke from this platform for the most part, the urgent need to recognize reset, 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 even if they didn't call it by that name. It is as if we all truly understand and accept the challenge of rising to solve the major difficulties that are faced by the people of the world, and to recognize that global moral strategic requires of us the commitment to redress the wrongs and to take care of saving people and planet. But recognition of the need for the reset, while it is the first step in any issue, what is now also needed is eternal vigilance as our companion, so that as we take the steps to transform attitudes and institutions and rules, we will not succeed overnight. We will not succeed even in the next decade. But if we don't do the reset to change the legacy of centuries of exploitation and domination, we will not be fit for purpose to meet the needs of our people in the third decade of the 21st century. I can think, therefore, of no better way to conclude than with a song that I had cause to use almost 30 years ago from my own country. Song from the year when I first stood on this podium almost 30 years ago in 1995, the young minister of youth. And I quote, "A voice in my head keeps talking to me. It tells me the road is long. It tells me we must be strong. Roll with the pain and roll with the strife. For today is the rest and start of your life." This president gave a new hope, fostered here this week, signal the start of a new deal for people who hitherto were not seen, and even with the existence of this body, whose voice and presence were not felt. These people have been recognized too often in these countries as mere statistics, and not with the human dignity that is their birthright, or the human dignity that is the conferred right from these United Nations. Mr. President, thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister, Minister for National Security and Public Service, and Minister for Finance, Economic Affairs, Investment of Barbados.